It's a way of showing you're cool, that you're solid, that you're tough. I'm not saying I'm some kind of criminal. Nearly 2 decades after Michael Jackson died, Neverland Ranch is still generating headlines nobody quite expected. The place that once served as his private sanctuary has turned into a source of fresh discoveries and revived questions that continue to surprise both fans and critics. From overlooked corners of the property to reports reopening long-standing debates, the Neverland story refuses to settle. Each new detail adds another layer to a location already wrapped in mystery and controversy. Here's a look at what's recently surfaced and why the estate keeps pulling public attention back to it. Michael Jackson was born on August 29, 1958, in Gary, Indiana, one of 10 children. From the start, the Jackson household ran on discipline, structure, and an unrelenting focus on music. His father, Joe Jackson, was the driving force behind that culture. Joe spent his days working in a steel mill, but at home he took on the role of manager, convinced that raw talent wasn't enough without rigorous training. He held his children to strict rules and demanding standards. As a result, Michael's early years looked nothing like a typical childhood. Instead of playgrounds and free time, there were hours of rehearsal with his brothers. Joe was known for scrutinizing every element of a performance, from vocal timing to footwork to stage presence, and family accounts later described the rehearsals as harsh, with little tolerance for mistakes. That environment made perfection the household's central value. Joe wasn't just a father, he managed the Jackson 5 as well, the group he'd formed with sons Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and Michael. That dual role blurred any line between family life and career, meaning practice could happen at any hour and expectations followed the children wherever they went. Michael, who emerged early as the group's standout talent, felt that pressure most acutely. By age 5 he was already the group's lead singer, and his voice and stage instincts set him apart even from his older brothers. Rather than easing into fame, he was thrust directly into it, performing for large crowds while still a young child. When the Jackson 5 signed with Motown in 1969, hits like I Want You Back, ABC, and I'll Be There sent them to the top of the charts and turned them into national stars. Michael became the face of that success, his image everywhere despite still being a kid, and as his talent grew, so did the weight riding on him. As he matured, Michael began stepping out of the Jackson 5's shadow and building a solo career, a shift that mattered enormously to him. Fame within the group hadn't been enough. He wanted authorship over his own music, image, and future, and to be seen as an artist in his own right rather than just one part of a family act. That ambition produced Off the Wall in 1979, an album that revealed a more mature, polished, and personal side of him than his work with his brothers ever had. Tracks like Don't Stop Till You Get Enough and Rock With You became massive radio hits, and critics singled out his voice, rhythm, and genre-blending style for praise. Still, success alone didn't satisfy him. He believed there was a bigger ceiling to reach, a global one, and that hunger pushed him from wanting success toward chasing outright perfection. That pursuit reached its peak in 1982 with Thriller, an album that reshaped the music industry and became the best-selling record of all time. Billie Jean, Beat It, and the title track each dominated the charts in their own way, and the album didn't just sell records, it changed how audiences engaged with music altogether. Much of that shift came through the videos, which functioned less like song clips and more like fully produced short films blending choreography, style, and visual effects. Billie Jean gained even more cultural weight after Michael's 1983 performance at the Motown 25th anniversary special, where he debuted the moonwalk, a move that would become one of the most recognizable gestures in pop culture history. Even as his career hit unprecedented heights, though, his personal world was quietly becoming more closed off. Through the late 80s and early 90s, Michael's career stayed strong even as scrutiny of his personal life intensified. His 1987 album Bad proved Thriller wasn't a fluke, delivering hits like Bad, Smooth Criminal, The Way You Make Me Feel, and Man in the Mirror. Dangerous, released in 1991, kept him at the center of global pop culture with songs like Black or White and Remember the Time. By this point he wasn't just a musician, he was a figure whose every move drew attention, and people started noticing that his appearance was changing. His skin grew visibly lighter over time, sparking speculation across the media. Michael attributed the change to vitiligo, a condition that causes patches of skin to lose pigmentation, along with lupus, another condition affecting the skin. He said makeup was used to even out the resulting discoloration. As the condition progressed, the shift in his appearance became more pronounced, and despite his explanation, public skepticism only grew. Reports of cosmetic surgery added to the scrutiny, with his nose and facial structure appearing noticeably different from his younger years. Procedures he described as minor and largely related to breathing issues, though speculation persisted regardless. At the same time, observers noted changes in how he spoke and carried himself in interviews. A softer, sometimes childlike voice, visible discomfort in public settings, and increasingly rare and guarded public appearances. This fed further speculation about his emotional state and personality. Tabloid coverage leaned into a simplified caricature that emphasized his eccentricities over his artistry, and the nickname Wacko Jacko became common shorthand in headlines. Public opinion split sharply. Some fans continued to see a musical genius who'd reshaped the industry, while others viewed him as an increasingly strange and unpredictable figure. That tension between his talent and his private conduct only deepened as more questions about his identity accumulated. In 1988, Michael bought a roughly 2,700-acre property in Santa Barbara County, California, in a secluded, nature-filled setting that would soon become one of the most talked-about estates on Earth. He named it Neverland Ranch after the world of Peter Pan, a place where nobody has to grow up. For him, it wasn't simply a residence. It was a space designed around personal longing, built to recreate the childhood he often said fame had taken from him. Over the years, the property evolved into something closer to a private amusement park than a home. It featured Ferris wheels, roller coasters, bumper cars, and even its own train system running through the grounds, all meant to keep entertainment available around the clock. A private zoo housed elephants, giraffes, llamas, tigers, and other exotic animals, blending nature and fantasy into the estate's identity. Inside the main house sat a private theater, and various rooms were designed with bright colors, toys, and candy-themed decor meant to feel playful rather than formal. One of the ranch's most recognizable residents was Bubbles, Michael's pet chimpanzee, who traveled with him and became something of a public symbol of his unconventional attachment to innocence and companionship. The estate ran with a full staff: cooks, cleaners, security, animal caretakers, and assistants, and access was tightly controlled, with guests admitted only by invitation and movements largely managed by staff. Visitors often described Neverland as feeling separate from the outside world, calm, private, and centered entirely around enjoyment. Michael regularly hosted children, friends, and celebrities there, with gatherings built around games, entertainment, and shared activities. For him, the ranch represented far more than luxury. It reflected an emotional need to reclaim a version of childhood he felt he'd missed. It became a space where fantasy and reality merged in a deeply personal way, and remained one of the defining elements of his life, even as it began drawing scrutiny that would eventually reshape everything around it. Despite his global fame, Michael's emotional life stayed remarkably small and closely held. Much of that pattern traced back to his relationship with his father. Michael later described Joe as strict, controlling, and emotionally distant, someone whose demanding rehearsal regimen left him fearful during his early years, an experience that shaped how he approached trust and authority for the rest of his life. His bond with his mother, Catherine, stood in sharp contrast. She represented warmth, stability, and safety, someone he stayed close to and relied on well into adulthood. His relationship with his siblings, particularly Janet, was also significant. The two shared an understanding of fame's pressures from growing up in the same household, even if their careers often pulled them in different directions. Beyond family, his closest relationships tended to be with people who understood fame from the inside. His friendship with Elizabeth Taylor was especially close, built on a mutual understanding of the isolation that comes with early stardom. He also formed a well-known friendship with actor Macaulay Culkin in the early 1990s, which included time together at Neverland and shared activities like watching movies. Michael often said he felt more at ease around children since he didn't feel judged or pressured by them. Culkin later described the friendship as innocent and said Michael was kind to him. Even so, Michael let very few people into his inner life, and being surrounded by staff and guests didn't necessarily translate into genuine connection. He tended to avoid large gatherings in favor of controlled environments where he knew everyone present, a preference for safety that came at the cost of forming new relationships. Over time, that pattern deepened his reliance on a small circle of trusted people, which in turn reinforced just how separate he'd become from the wider world, even while remaining one of its most visible figures. In 1993, Michael's life changed dramatically when he faced serious allegations for the first time, a turning point that ushered in years of legal and media pressure. The case involved a 13-year-old named Jordan Chandler, who'd been introduced to Michael through his father, Evan Chandler, a Los Angeles dentist. The relationship initially appeared friendly, with the Chandler family visiting Neverland and spending time with Michael that included sleepovers, travel, and gifts, the kind of access Michael frequently extended to children and described as innocent. Over time, Evan Chandler grew uneasy about the closeness between his son and Michael, prompting him to question Jordan directly. Jordan later made statements to a psychiatrist that, by law, had to be reported, triggering a formal investigation. Once that happened, law enforcement and child protection authorities got involved, and investigators searched Neverland, collecting documents and photographs as part of the inquiry. Michael cooperated fully and denied any wrongdoing, insisting he'd never harmed a child and was being unfairly targeted. He also underwent a physical examination tied to the allegations, which his legal team argued contradicted the accuser's description. The case dragged on amid intense media coverage, and in early 1994 Michael reached a civil settlement with the Chandler family reported at around $23 million, explicitly not an admission of guilt, but an end to the lawsuit. The criminal investigation stayed open longer, but prosecutors ultimately declined to bring charges, largely because Jordan Chandler wouldn't testify. Without that testimony, there was no case to bring to trial, and Michael was never criminally convicted. Still, the reputational damage was immediate. Coverage of the allegations dominated headlines worldwide and marked the first time Michael's public image shifted from beloved icon to a figure under serious suspicion. The Wacko Jacko label became even more entrenched during this period, and public opinion split further between those who believed in his innocence and those who didn't. It was the opening chapter of a far longer struggle with legal scrutiny and public doubt. Between 2003 and 2005, Michael faced an even larger legal battle, this time involving a 13-year-old named Gavin Arvizo, in a case that turned into a global media spectacle. Michael had met Gavin, who was being treated for cancer, through his charitable work visiting sick children, and the Arvizo family later spent time at Neverland. In 2003, Michael appeared in the documentary Living with Michael Jackson, directed by journalist Martin Bashir, in which he spoke candidly about children staying overnight at the ranch, describing the practice as innocent. The film sparked significant public backlash, and scrutiny of his behavior intensified almost immediately afterward. Shortly after the documentary aired, the Arvizo family accused Michael of serious misconduct, and prosecutors filed charges including molestation, conspiracy, and providing alcohol to a minor. The resulting trial began in 2005 in Santa Maria, California, drawing crowds of reporters and onlookers and becoming a worldwide media event. Prosecutors built their case around testimony from Gavin and his family, along with references to Michael's earlier controversies. The defense pushed back hard, arguing the Arvizo family had a pattern of dishonesty and financial motive, and revisited the 1993 case to suggest a broader pattern of questionable accusations. Macaulay Culkin testified for the defense, stating he'd spent many nights at Neverland as a child and never witnessed or experienced anything inappropriate, testimony that received considerable media attention. The trial stretched on for months under constant scrutiny, with public opinion sharply divided over Michael's guilt or innocence. On June 13, 2005, the jury acquitted him on all counts. Though legally cleared, Michael emerged visibly worn down by the process. He soon left the United States, withdrew largely from public life, and stopped using Neverland as his home, later saying the estate no longer felt comforting to him. His exit from Neverland marked the close of a defining chapter, and the beginning of a much quieter, more distant phase of his life. Once the trial ended, Neverland's role in Michael's life essentially dissolved. The estate that had once buzzed with visitors, staff, and activity grew still and largely forgotten. Michael spent time living abroad, including stints in the Middle East and Europe, deliberately avoiding public attention and living a far more private existence. Without him there, the ranch lost its purpose. Staff numbers shrank, maintenance slowed, and the rides and attractions that once defined the property began to deteriorate or were dismantled altogether. The sense of a tightly run, self-contained world faded along with the upkeep. Eventually the property changed hands, sold and rebranded under new ownership with a focus on restoration and commercial use rather than the fantasy-driven design Michael had built. Public perception shifted accordingly. Neverland went from being seen as a whimsical dream home to something closer to an abandoned landmark defined by controversy. Media interest never fully disappeared, though. Journalists and documentary crews continued returning to the estate whenever Michael's story resurfaced, treating it as a symbol that could be reinterpreted depending on whatever narrative was being told. Speculation lingered, too, about closed-off sections of the property and what might have gone unexamined there, keeping public curiosity alive well after the estate stopped functioning as a home. In the end, Neverland moved from being a living, active space into something more symbolic, its physical reality intact, but its meaning constantly reshaped by whoever was telling its story. If you found this breakdown worthwhile, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing for more deep dives like this one, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.